Welcome to the Macdonald-Laurier Institute. I'm the head of MLI, Brian Crowley, and I'd like to ask you to join me in giving a warm Canadian springtime welcome to Mr. Krišjānis Kariņš, the Prime Minister of our country's friend and ally, the Republic of Latvia. We're here today to participate in a conversation with Mr. Kariņš, the leader of a country in whose defense Canada has invested willingly and greatly, and given the evidence of Russia's invasion of Ukraine, we have done so with considerable forethought. For 5 years now, the Macdonald-Laurier Institute has made Canada's relationships and security commitments in Eastern and Central Europe in general, and our relationship with Latvia in particular, a major pillar of our foreign policy work. We early laid out the case first for establishing and later strengthening and extending Canada's enhanced forward presence mission in Latvia by a series of public and private events. Our annual Canada and the Baltic Strategic Dialogue is becoming the premier venue for frank discussions in Canada on security issues in the Baltics and beyond. In last year's dialogue, His Excellency the President of the Republic of Latvia, Egils Levits, gave the opening keynote to over 75 leading policymakers, diplomats, and experts across the transatlantic alliance. In March this year, we hosted both Jānis Gersons, the State Secretary for the Ministry of Defense, and Artis Pabriks, the Deputy Prime Minister and Minister of Defense, for lively and frank discussions with Canadian officials and foreign diplomats. In short, MLI has been the Canadian leader in promoting strong ties between Canada and Latvia. And Russia's unprovoked war of aggression against Ukraine, to which I've already alluded, provides a poignant reminder of the dangers posed by the Kremlin to the democratic world. Our Latvian and Central and Eastern European allies who are on the front lines in facing down the sustained Russian challenge to European and North Atlantic security and stability have been raising the alarm for years. Canada was relatively late to the party, but now we are committed, and one of the great benefits has been a deepening and broadening of Canada's friendship with Latvia, a country whose resolve and determination we have all come to admire. We at Emily have been, we colloquially refer to the Institute as Emily. We at Emily have been tirelessly talking with Canadians and their government about Russian efforts to subvert our democratic institutions through disinformation and hybrid warfare, as well as the threat posed by Russian revisionism to the rules-based order through our publications, op-eds, panels, and outreach to policymakers. And by the way, speaking of policymakers, I'd like to recognize the attendance here today of David Collinette, a former Minister of Defense, and we're delighted to have you here. On this side of the Atlantic, we at Emily have been the leading voice for a stronger, more capable, and principled Canadian policy against Russian revanchism and in support of our allies. I should note that our adversaries also recognize the importance and effectiveness of MLI's work. The Kremlin sanctioned no less than five of our senior fellows, including Balkan. I think, did they sanction you, Shuv? They did. We've got to get a better class of people on the sanction list. Congratulations. So the Kremlin has sanctioned 5 of our senior fellows in recent months, banning them from entering Russia indefinitely. Our hearts are broken. There goes my winter holiday in Siberia. Other authoritarian regimes, such as the Chinese Communist Party, have publicly attacked MLI in their statements. MLI is probably unique among Canadian public policy institutions in that it has drawn the ire of both the Kremlin and the Chinese Communist Party for its principled and unwavering stance on human rights, democracy, and in defense of Canadian values and interests. They are clearly paying attention to what we have to say, just as Canada's continuing presence in Latvia is due, in part, to our influence here at home. We're proud of MLI's work in promoting and deepening transatlantic ties, and I'm delighted that we are continuing this important work in 2022. More, of course, needs to be done, and rest assured, more will be forthcoming in the months ahead. We are honored to have Mr. Kariņš at MLI today, and I'm looking forward to hearing his insights on the common challenges we face and how we can work even closer together in defending our common security, prosperity, and values. And now I'd like to turn the floor over to MLI Senior Fellow Dr. Balkan Devlen to lead the conversation with the Prime Minister. Balkan, as I've already said, is one of our senior fellows who was proudly sanctioned by the Kremlin for his work on Canada's interests in Russia, NATO, and Latvia. And I'm exceedingly proud to have such articulate, courageous, and thoughtful people as Balkan as colleagues here at the Institute. Over to you, Balkan.
Thank you very much, Brian, for your kind words and introduction. Welcome, Mr. Prime Minister. It's a pleasure and honor to have you here. A few quick words about the format. We'll have a conversation about half an hour with the Prime Minister, and then in the last 10-15 minutes, I'll open up for questions and answers for the audience to ask their questions to the Prime Minister. This event is being recorded and will be shared publicly after the event. Prime Minister, let me start with the event that is everybody's mind, that is the war in Ukraine, Russia's war of aggression in Ukraine. I'd like to get your take on not only sort of the current situation, because you are right there, very in the front lines, seeing and understanding the developments, but also the implications of this war going forward for European and transatlantic security.
Thank you very much, and hello to everyone. It's an honor and a privilege and a pleasure to be here with you this afternoon. If this is your spring, I wonder what your summer is like. But on a more serious note, February 24th really changed the world security situation quite drastically. I could say as a Latvian that unfortunately we have been right all along. That is, Russia is posing a direct threat not only to Ukraine, but actually to all of European security. The Russian leadership is still in the mode imperialism, disregard for national self-determination. This is 17th, 18th, 19th century stuff, but it is unfortunately alive and kicking just to the east of our own country. The Ukrainians, they are fighting our battle. They are fighting for the ideals of freedom, democracy, the rule of law, not the rule of might. They are dying and they are determined. And Ukraine has to win the war. That has to be the goal that we all have to be striving for. Because if Ukraine does not win the war, then Putin will lick his wounds and sooner or later continue in like fashion. Where that would it be in Moldova? Would it be Georgia? Would it be the Baltic countries? Would it be somewhere else? Is difficult to say, but a leadership bent on empire has to be stopped. And the Ukrainians are fighting the fight, and we collectively are providing the armaments and the ability for them to defend themselves. So that the security situation is changed, and the only way to go back to how it was before is not possible. I don't see that happening. We have to make certain that Putin does not have the ability to attack any part of Europe in the future, and that is one through Ukraine's victory now, and secondarily through strengthening all of NATO's position in the east, not only in Latvia but in my neighboring countries, and all the way down through the Black Sea, so Romania, Bulgaria, down through these countries as well. And we have to rethink, and this is one of the goals that we're working for towards the Madrid NATO summit coming up in just about 6 weeks, is changing, especially in the Baltics, the strategy from a tripwire strategy to forward defense strategy. That is, we see what happens when the Russian army advances over territory. It completely annihilates the physical infrastructure, which is bad enough, but it kills civilians, rapes, tortures, deports, all of these things that we read about in World War II history books. It's happening again. The Baltic countries lack one thing that Ukraine has, which is a certain kind of strategic depth. It's a physically large country for Europe. Speaking in Canada about large countries is, but for Europe, it's a large country. It takes hours in a good vehicle or in a train to traverse. The Baltic countries are small. In 1 hour of driving, you can get to any of our capitals. And in Vilnius is some 30, 40 kilometers from the Belarusian border. It is right on the Belarusian border. So the tripwire defense is based upon there's enough serious military presence to put up a serious fight, but probably losing some territory and then reinforcing and coming back. But that's an expensive way to fight a war, as we see in Ukraine. We're all arming them and helping them, but it's costing money, it's costing lives. The more clever way to defend oneself is to never have that war in the first place. And that's why having an active forward defense with all of the needed capabilities to deter any attack immediately is the best way to ensure that attack will never happen. It is the least expensive way for us to defend our values and our way of life. My country is investing, we just made a decision to go to 2.5% of GDP on our defense. We're spending about 2.2% now. So over the next 3 years, we'll be moving up to 2.5%. We'll be increasing the size of our army and our army's capabilities, acquiring new technologies and clever ways to defend ourselves. But what we need assistance with, and where NATO is helping, is to fill in some of the gaps in terms of size, but especially in terms of capability. And in the Baltics, what we need is what we call a divisional level defensive capabilities with all of the so-called enablers. So it's not only number of soldiers, it's that you have all of the proper, the radars, the air defense, et cetera, to handle any and all contingencies. So Ukraine must win. We have to help them. And the way to stop that from happening in the future is to be tough and robust. And we will certainly, as a country, continue to invest in our own defense. And my prediction is that when we hit 2.5%, we will then move on beyond that. But we have to get there first.
I think this is an excellent point to get to the second thing that I would like to talk about, because I really like the fact that you highlighted the, metaphorically speaking, if we do not spend pennies today, we will be spending hundreds of dollars in the future. So it is the time to build those capabilities now and prevent what happened in Ukraine to happen in the Baltics or elsewhere. And Latvia is Canada's one of the closest allies. Our presence is there. But at the Institute, we have been arguing for a much more robust Canadian foreign policy and engagement and the necessary capabilities to go along with them. And when you look at the future of transatlantic relations after the war in Ukraine, and with the important caveats that you have highlighted, how do you see Canada playing a greater role?
Well, one, I see Canada playing a tremendous role already. I think Canada is taking a leadership role in NATO, which I think is extremely important. So directly it's through the heading the EFP in Latvia, and Canada has now sent additional soldiers and additional armaments. That is being done. But in terms of European defense, or Ukrainian assistance, I don't know which way to say it. So our goal is for Ukraine to win and Russia to lose. So we need to arm Ukraine. That's conceptually easy to understand. Then we need to limit the Kremlin's capability to rearm itself. So we have to stop its economy. economy is being slowed down now quite greatly through various sanctions. And their biggest source of income for the government is energy exports, oil and gas. Europe, we are in the process, we've agreed on coal. We're in the process of trying to find the right way for everyone. And in Europe, it's a consensual decision by 27 countries to agree on oil, and then the last leg would be natural gas. But already, governments such as ours and others are finding alternative sources. And Canada, I think, has a huge role to play in the future in the field of energy and cooperating with Europe. And this is both on supplies of oil and liquefied gas, which there will be a very large demand in Europe, because in Europe we are definitely moving away from Russian oil and gas. As a Baltic Prime Minister, we wanted that to happen February 24th, but it's moving in absolutely the right direction. So there will be a larger market there, but also in terms of Canadian investment into Europe. I'd especially invited into the Baltic countries and in Latvia, into various projects. We are moving very quickly forward now on developing more wind energy, because of course we also need to wean ourselves from Russian energy dependence. And we are 40% renewable, but that means we're 60% dependent, and it's getting rid of that 60%. So oil products, that's somewhat more easy. Tankers are running around the world. You simply source it differently. The prices, it's a worldwide commodity. Gas is much more pipeline oriented, and there will be investments in LNG terminals in Europe and in the Baltics, and in renewable sources. So I think Canada's role, and I think that, as a Latvian coming to Canada, one of the messages is that, Canada is doing an outstanding job right now in taking one of the leadership roles, and not to be in any way underestimated. It's extremely appreciated in our country, but not only in our country. And I think that there's plenty of opportunity there within the NATO military framework, but also in terms of the economy. And I think it also is a very sound business proposition for Canadian companies. There are plenty of very good opportunities, but in a synergetic way with needs in Latvia and in Europe, and abilities and possibilities that Canada has to offer.
I think what I'm hearing is that the sort of the leadership and commitment Canada shows when it comes to the defense relationship should actually also extend to engage with the energy and the private investment component. And perhaps here in Canada we need to get our house in order to be able to support our allies and provide this Canadian energy to our allies in Europe, who are very clearly in demand of this. So I think that's a message that our officials and politicians really need to get. Taking from moving from that perspective, when you had your meetings and your meetings later on with your counterparts here, how do you see the next steps for Canadian-Latvian relationship, deepening and strengthening further down the road?
Okay, so we've spoken about the military side, and we've spoken some about the energy side. But as all politicians, you have to look beyond the war right now, and you have to think what happens in 5, 10, 15 years. I think that the ability and the natural interest in synergy in developing bilateral relations economically across a very broad range are very, very wide indeed. Remember that for any Canadian company investing into Latvia is investing into the European market. So if you produce in Latvia, Latvia has a population of 2 million, but we're in a union of an internal market of over 400 million. It's a quite lucrative, rather rich market. We have a very growing, our largest exporting sector, which for years was the timber industry and food, is now electronics. that, quietly we've been working on revamping our educational system, making the business environment such to encourage investment and growth. And now we're finally seeing it really paying off. Our largest exporting companies in the electronics industry that are heavily moving with 5G, not only software but hardware is being produced in Latvia. And there are plenty of business opportunities and synergies. And this is, okay, Canadians and Latvians both love hockey. So that's one similarity that's rather obvious. And I have to say that if we can beat the Canadian team, it makes our season. We can lose the series, but that's a fine thing. Even to be able to stand up to the Canadians is a thrill. That's on a humorous note, but on a serious note, that our cooperation is sort of naturally growing for many reasons, and I think that there's a lot to look forward to, and for the Canadians to remember that Latvia, as an EU member state, is part of a 400 million market. So it's a great springboard, and as a relatively small country, not relatively, and for a Canadian, absolutely small country, we're also extremely agile, and it's like there's the big tanker, and then there's a little speedboat. Our country and our government is more akin to a speedboat. We can quite quickly make adjustments that have big effects. And the tanker, there's a command to, turn left, and half an hour later, it slowly starts to turn left, as the little boat has already made 2 or 3 circles. And this is, it's a very dynamic environment because also of its size, and our country's hunger and appetite to grow and improve and learn new things. Because we don't have an inherited, this is the way it's always been done, we are very adept at doing things that haven't been done. That we never learned that you couldn't do it, so to speak. So we're just doing it, and there's lots of opportunity. I know that right now we have a couple of companies that are moving forward, that want to move forward into the semiconductor business. They are, in terms of expertise and what they're doing, they're working in the 5G technologies. There's lots of great business opportunities in our country, not only military cooperation, but especially economic cooperation.
One of the points that you highlighted, the agility that Latvia could show, I think it's a very important point to highlight what Canada and Canadians can also learn on various fronts from Latvia and Latvian experience. One of the areas that I would like you to sort of comment on is dealing with disinformation and subversion. Stratcom Center of Excellence is in Riga. Latvia has been at the forefront of it and dealing with it. Here in Canada, my friend and colleague Marcus Kolga and his project with DisinfoWatch and MLI project have been at the forefront, dealing with election interference, foreign subversion attempts, and disinformation. Your experience, what would be like the 3 top things you would, if you want to give an advice for the Canadian public and more broadly, in dealing with foreign election interference and disinformation from the Latvian experience?
There's really one thing, is awareness. Mm-hmm. If you can become aware that it occurs or can occur, then you can start to deal with it. It's like, socially speaking, when you realize you have a problem, then you can start to deal with your problem. You're overweight, okay, maybe you should eat less and exercise more. And if you think that that you're immune, you probably already have a problem. Because in the way that we're all, we all live off of our telephones, and we bank on our telephones, and we communicate on our telephones, and we get information through our telephones. And Russia is maybe not so good at some things, but one thing that they're actually getting very good at is insidiously creating dissonance. So pitting one side against the other. They'll the so-called left or the right, it doesn't really matter. What they're looking for is differences of opinion, and to emphasize that and to highlight it. So they'll send on one side trolling and on the other side trolling and get people riled up because they're in the business of trying to weaken the West because they feel threatened by democracy, which is understandable, that because God forbid, from Putin's point of view, what if Ukrainian democracy were to spread into Russia itself? Well, the logical conclusion would be maybe the Russians, when they decided upon their leader, would actually choose a different leader. And so as a self-preserving instinct of an autocrat, you have to fight that. And the best way to fight that is to make the Democrats squabble among themselves, whether it's on abortion, whether it's on any of the social issues, inflation, which is now a difficulty throughout the world. Well, one of the ways that we're trying to be told that that peace at any cost is that the war in Ukraine is causing worldwide inflation to go up, and this is because you're supporting Ukraine. But it's not because we're supporting Ukraine. It's because Putin attacked Ukraine, and Putin withheld gas supplies to Europe and drove up gas prices throughout Europe and as a knock-on around the world. It's the wrong cause and effect. And this is what, some years back, not so many, maybe 5 years ago, Russian disinformation seemed rather crude. Easy to, if you're looking for it, very easy to see. They're getting better and better at it. And they will look, and there's nothing is off the table, whether it's Canadian elections, US elections, German elections, French elections. The main goal is to weaken by creating discord. And the awareness that this can happen is the way to start. And then you can look at where it's happening, and then look at how the argument is often made absolutely off of an incorrect premise. And then you can get back to the premise and get a message out that is actually correct. Because you will be attacked, and you are being attacked. So it's best to prepare yourself there. And in terms of the future threats that we face in the West, the hybrid kinds of threats with disinformation at its source is not going to go away. It's going to probably be getting more insidious and more difficult to unearth. But there are many such stories. So remember in Germany, I've forgotten the timeline now, 1, 2 years ago, 5 years ago, there was a story of a girl being raped by Syrian refugees. And there was a huge uproar in German society, and it affected the government. And it turns out that actually there was no rape. It was never the case. And it was traced back to where the story came from. Well, it came from the East. And it's things like this that to weaken any government. And it can be a government of the left or a government of the right.
They did target Canadian armed forces personnel in Latvia with similar disinformation campaigns. I remember that also being used around the same time. Which brings me to another question related with Ukraine. You very clearly point out that we need to be clear-eyed about the threat and the long-term challenge that Russia poses. One of the issues prior to the reinvasion in February 24th was the unwillingness or reluctance in some Western powers in Europe and elsewhere to provide arms to Ukraine, arguing that this would lead to escalation, et cetera, et cetera. In other words, the failure of deterrence by denying the reality of the situation and Russian ambitions brings us to the war. When you look back, if you need to identify perhaps 3 lessons learned from the failure of deterrence in Ukraine, deterring Russian aggression, things that we should not repeat again in the future, what would they be?
Well, one thing is we have to accept that Putin does not think in our categories. So I've had many a conversation with European colleagues who some months ago used language such as we shouldn't provoke Putin, and there seemed to be a sentiment among some that if we only found the right words, Putin would finally understand that we are not interested in attacking him. And it's this false, it's believing, actually the failure was in believing Putin's narrative. Because Putin says he feels threatened by NATO, which is hogwash. He has never felt threatened by NATO because he and his military and his security services are certainly adept enough to understand that our societies would never willingly attack Russia. It would make no sense. It's never been on the table or on the cards for anyone. But through this false narrative, then that false starting point leads to the next false part of the chain that we shouldn't provoke him, and this is I can imagine he was extremely happy because he's dictating the narrative and we're hook, line, and sinkering it, and that was our mistake. And what we need to realize now that it has been realized as a mistake, and it's been realized in capitals throughout Europe, and you can see that in actions. So if before February 24th, I believe it was the Baltic countries, Poland, and the Netherlands, either they had or they had been thinking about, but no one else was delivering weapons to Ukraine. Now it's just a handful of European countries that are not delivering weapons to Ukraine. Our country has now delivered about 220 million. It's one of the, in absolute terms, it's quite high up there, and in relative terms, we're together with the Estonians. The two of us are far beyond. To get a sense of that, that's 1/3 of our military budget almost. That's and for us, it's not. We didn't even think in these terms. But we felt immediately that this is our war, and they're fighting it. And the best way to defend ourselves is to help Ukraine. It was not a long and difficult discussion. It was immediately, and we didn't wait for the attack. We understood that it was a real threat, and so we provided arms to help the Ukrainians defend themselves in case of, and with the idea that this would help to ward off any attack. So this is one of the I think it's the fundamental lesson to understand that Putin was going to, or when he actually made the decision to attack Ukraine is unclear. It seems to maybe have actually come in the last month. I mean, he was building up the ability to, and then it seems that the actual decision was made later, but that was made upon a calculation of we in the West will not react. And that was Putin's miscalculation. So both sides miscalculated. But we allowed Putin to miscalculate because we were not willing to be robust. And Putin understands lack of willingness to be robust as weakness. And he falsely thought that we were weak. Well, we are not weak. We are extremely strong. But we allowed the perception to come out that we're weak. And that was, Putin's miscalculation. Now he's started a war where, wars take on, their own logic and are extremely unpredictable. But it's this fundamental flaw of thinking. Maybe the best way to explain it, what I've learned I'm 20 years as a politician. I'm a little embarrassed to say, but. In the West, two of us have a disagreement. And what we instinctively do, whether you're in Canada or in Germany or in Latvia, one side will take a step back, the other time will take a step back, and you'll look for common ground to make a compromise. Because we are inherently consensus and compromise oriented. I say black, you say white, and then we look for creating a gray zone that we can actually agree upon. But when any of us are dealing with Putin, there's a disagreement, so we'll take a step back, Putin smirks and says, "You weakling," and he'll take a step forward. So in our attempt to be, proper democrats, we don't even think about it, we just do it. When we step back, he steps forward because he perceives that falsely as weakness. And this is a continual difficulty for Russia of thinking because we can squabble about anything that we're inherently weak. Because in Russia, no one squabbles, they're shot, sent to jail, or whatever. So that's strength. And we weak scrabblers. We're liberal. We tolerate so many things, and it's a world of different thinking. And as a Latvian, we know this from many years of experience, that simply the thinking in Russia and in the Russian leadership is completely different from ours, and we should not fall prey to their narrative. And that was the biggest mistake. I can't think of three things, or if we were to come down on paper with three things, they would all start from this one fundamental error.
Yes. I think as a good neo-Bolshevik, Vladimir Putin really follows Lenin's adage of "Kto kvo," who whom, trying to dominate, and that's the. Unless we understand that particular mentality that we are dealing with, we will make these mistakes. But hope and those mistakes sometimes could be very expensive. And I think the point you highlighted, that the support for Ukraine is not charity; it is defense of our own interests and values, and we need to approach it from that perspective. It is not a nice to have. But it is essential.
I would even say it further, that if we don't stop Putin in Ukraine,
yes,
it will be so much more difficult to stop him elsewhere.
Yes, indeed.
I mean, it is our fight, whether we want it or not.
Indeed. And I think that's a point that in some within the alliance really need to take into account, like you pointed out, about 1/3 almost of the defense spending that you're providing. Countries such as Canada, that has much higher GDP, need to step up and provide a lot more than few hundred million, 500 million supposed support. So I think that is still slowly downing on some of the allies, and I think this is a very, very important message. Before going to the audience, I want to ask you one last question. Tomorrow, probably, Finland will be applying officially for I think on the 12th for NATO membership, and Sweden will follow very, very, very quickly. Today, Boris Johnson announced a defense pact to cover the period between the application and the membership, which puts the alliance not only it matters for the Baltic security, but even beyond. Maps can be looked in different ways. We tend to think the Baltics is in the northeastern corner of the alliance. But a different way of looking at it, it's in the middle between the Arctic and the Black Sea, in which Russia is the primary threat, which places the Baltics and Latvia at the center of the challenge that NATO is going to face, especially with Finland and Sweden joining. How do you see the security environment evolving in the Baltic Sea area, with the joining and with the connections with the Nordic and Baltic region broadly going to the Arctic, evolving with Finland and Sweden joining NATO?
Only positively. Yeah. That is, we see Finland and Sweden joining NATO as absolutely a regional boon, increasing regional security. The Finns and the Swedes, they already cooperate. We're often in joint exercises. Especially Finland has had a very robust defensive position. Effectively, they were the only European country to never assume that because the Soviet Union dissolved, the Russian threat disappeared. They have continued to keep up their own military posture and have one of the largest and ablest and capablest armies in Europe right now. They they've been keenly aware of the situation, never assuming that things are going to be rosy. The Swedes, it seemed, some years back, made a decision that they no longer felt threatened. They drastically cut their defensive spending. I think it's been 5 years now where they've been reversing that, and we see that as a very positive sign. But with these two powers coming into the NATO fold, so they're in the European, the EU fold, but now coming into the NATO, it will greatly increase regional security, because then we have Norway, Sweden, Finland, the Baltics, Poland, Germany, and Denmark, all in NATO, and that is a great, great boon. It doesn't change the fact that our three countries are up against the sea. So we have Russia to the east, Belarus, and our western flank is the Baltic Sea, which means inherently it's more difficult to reinforce in any rate. And that's why in the Baltics, as it's a little different from, say, Romania or Bulgaria or Poland in terms of its defense, that you need that robust forward presence. Actually, a kind of forward presence that Finland has had all along.
Yes.
You know, the Russians know as much as any Western military analyst knows that the Finns are extremely capable of taking care of themselves. Thank you very much. In the Baltics and in Latvia, we had, when we first, just to understand our context, we regained our independence in 1991. Then in 2004, we joined both the EU and then NATO. It happened some months apart. When we joined NATO, our original thinking was, as you know, as a self-assessment, we're small. You know, you have the US, you have Canada, you have Germany, you have France, all of these big countries with large armies. Our best contribution would be to specialize in certain areas and to become sort of part of the NATO army. That, you know, basically defense is handled by NATO, and we will have, you know, it wasn't the decision, but say, you know, we're excellent snipers and artillerymen, but, you know, everything else is, you know, that others will fill the other gaps. After Russia's attack on Georgia, and after we, you know, 2014, but already with Georgia, when, as the US president was making the interesting reset after the war, which we found somewhat puzzling, to not say disturbing, we rethought our entire defensive strategy. And we developed a strategy first on territorial defense, and then we have been busy implementing that. So we have a very active and now a professionalized National Guard, which meshes into our professional army, which now on the Belarusian border, we have now trained also to work with border guard and police services. That is it's a complete territorial defense, basically modeled on the Finnish model. So, you know, to put it simply, you may wander into Latvia, but good luck with that. And we've actually seen that it works, that as Lukashenko started to do the human trafficking, and physically we have footage of pushing people across the border, no one has gotten through the Latvian border, even though there is no physical barrier. You know, you can come into our woods, but we hear you and we see you, and it will be taken care of. And we have been now trained up to interact across different security services. And but it's the Finnish model that we are, you know, to put it simply, it's a little more complex, but that's basically what we're doing. And we will be continuing on doing that. But with then coming into the NATO fold, that's a huge, huge boon, because it would be a direct deterrent from Russia making any future move west of their own border.
We need to be aware of that. Mr. Prime Minister, thank you very much for taking time today and sharing your insights with us. And it was a pleasure, and thank you very much for the audience for joining us today. Thank you.
Thank you.
before you go, I thought I might take a minute and tell you two stories about the kind of people that you got into bed with. That's to say, the Canadians.
Okay.
Stop now. And I hope you'll take these stories home, because I think they say something very important about Canadians. So, first story. You might know that one of the jobs that the Canadians had in the Second World War was the liberation of Holland. And Canada spent a lot of blood and treasure. You know, Canada was not threatened by the Nazis. That was far away. Nonetheless, we went to Europe. We liberated Holland. And one day, there was a Dutch fellow walking down the street, and he met a Canadian soldier coming the other way. And he stopped the Canadian soldier, and he said, "Look, I don't know you, you don't know me, but I know that you came from far away, and you shed a lot of blood and treasure to liberate my country, and I want to thank you." And the Canadian looked at him and said, "No need to thank me, sir. We had a job to do, and we did it." He saluted him, and he marched on. And that man went home and said to his family, "We have to move to that country." And they did move to Canada, and the son of that man became veteran member of the Canadian Parliament, very good friend of mine, who, you know, thinks it was the greatest thing that ever happened when his dad met that anonymous Canadian soldier. Second thing, I'm probably the only person old enough in the room to remember the Canada-Russia hockey series of 1972. No, Andrew, you're way too young. You were way too young. The reason I mentioned the Canada-Russia hockey series is the first time we'd ever played Russia in hockey. And it was 4 games in Canada, followed by 4 games in Russia. And at the end of, we thought, oh, no problem, we're the best hockey players in the world. At the end of 4 games in Canada, what was it, 3-1 for Russia?
Until the last game.
We were horrified. We never thought that this could happen. We were humiliated. So one of the first things that happened was we got to Russia, and in first game, Bobby Clark, nice boy from Flin Flon, Manitoba, captain of the Philadelphia Flyers, said to himself, "I'm going to have to do something about this." And he went out, and I'm sure it was purely accidental. Somehow, in a confrontation between Bobby Clark and the best player on the Russian team, the Russian's ankle got broken. And it took him out of the game, took him out of the series. And we won that series. And I tell you this because you will often hear it said that Canadians are nice. Canadians are nice, and perhaps, if you're in the position that Latvia's in, maybe the first quality you want in the troops that are there to help protect you is not niceness. And I'm here to tell you that Canadians are sometimes nice, and when necessary, not nice.
That's a wonderful story that explains the missing 2 front teeth.
Oh, Bob! I don't think Bobby Clark had any upper teeth. When the chips are down, we have a job to do. We'll do it. And those are the people that you've got in bed with. So we are delighted to have had you here. We're delighted that Canada is in Latvia. And we look forward to continuing to build this relationship and to ensure that Latvia can continue to enjoy the things that you so articulately talked about as the great features of life in liberal democratic society. And we want to make sure that you can continue to enjoy them, because we want them for ourselves, and what we want for ourselves, we want for other people too. Okay? Thank you very much.
Very good. Very
Thank
good
you.
words.
Thank you for coming.
Thank you.